Consortium. Build. Collapsed.
Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to another day of wonderful Scoopsmas. We've got another full house on tonight, joined by three lovely guests to talk about a good number of lovely scoops, as well as a bit of an unusual scoop for Daily Cast, but I thought one worth talking about. But my guests today are CableCarnage, Thrantar, and AliApp. And I'll have each of them introduce themselves quickly, talk about when they started playing, and maybe kind of what sort of play they do the most these days. So, CableCarnage, I'm going to put you up first on the spotlight.
Excellent. Hi, folks. I'm CableCarnage, also known as Dan. I started playing Netrunner around 2018. I consider myself more of a competitive player. Yeah, um, I hang around probably a bit too much on JNet, but yeah, that's me.
Great. Thrantar, you're up next.
Hello, I'm Thrantar. I came in and started playing seriously with the second half of the Borealis cycle. Was made aware of the project right around the release of Midnight Sun. I just didn't have a chance to get into it until Parhelion dropped. I play, I'd say, semi-seriously. When I sit on the table, like my goal is to win, but I'm not necessarily bringing the tier 1 decks. I'm a big aficionado for some RPC big deal action. I've been on a Kushik kick recently.
Very cool.
But
And AliApp, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Allison, AliApp on Discord and Jinteki. I started playing technically back in 2018, but that was kind of like a brief little bubble before I stopped, and then kind of official death drove me away for a bit. But I came back to it a couple months ago, looked at all the exciting new cards that had been released in the meanwhile, and I'm really excited to get back into it. I'd say kind of just casual for fun player. I definitely like taking things seriously, but I don't feel like I'm good enough to really claim any sort of competitive, uh, you know,
Yeah,
cachet on that.
I think that's one of the fun things about Netrunner is the game that you can play competitively, trying to win, but do it, in a way that's very individualized and expressive. I think we often use the term competitive player and casual player maybe a little bit incorrectly, and I'll try and start moving away from that language when I can. Also, quick shout out to Veronica. Hey, Veronica. Glad you're here, but also maybe you should be asleep like Dan, who I think is desperately trying to get out of here quickly. Um, so actually, we have Dan CableCarnage on because the new ban list just dropped. So this was the ban list that got announced. Oh, that is teeny tiny. Apologies, everyone. Weep. We'll make it giant because there's only 3 lines of text on it, and we can all deal with a little bit of blur. 3 changes that are coming in with the release of the standard ban list. Begalter is banned, Obokata Protocol is banned, and Tithonium is banned. So, Dan, do you want to very quickly summarize, what the rationale was in your article?
Yeah, sure, definitely. I probably should have added that to my introduction. I'm part of the ban list team. I'm the author of this article, so you can definitely read it and check it out. But yeah, right. Quick rationale. Let's start with Beatrice. It's the one you're displaying right now. Beatrice. It's a killer. I think the easiest thing is to contextualize it. The easiest thing is this just breaks sentries across the whole scale very effectively. It doesn't have any weak point, and actually for cheaper sentries, it breaks it either for a profit or credit neutral. What that means in terms of the metagame is if you're playing Crim, you have no reason to play any other killer. It turns money into breaking sentries, which is very good. And as I said, it doesn't have any bad breaking points. Out of faction, it's 4 influence, which is actually really steep, but it's still, if you have spare influence, which for example analogs do now, they could just import it, and then it's just extremely potent. And this is warping both on the runner side in the sense that this is clearly the best killer you can run. So if you don't really need any deck building costs, you just do it, and if you can afford the deck building kit, you also do it. Also, as I said, it's warping on the corpse side in terms of what sentries get played, as in smaller ones become a lot less good, and also there's not really, you just kind of try to play the ones that are standalone the best, and you're not trying to find weird breakpoints and stuff like that, because you'll struggle to just text this out.
Yeah, I will say, having been in playtest a bit, it was always annoying when we would get a sentry, but almost a killer in almost any faction, because you would just immediately, your first question would be, well, why would I run this over Begalter? And so many times the answer was, well, there isn't one, or because I'm trying to save 4 influence, but I have so much deck access that maybe it doesn't matter. So I like this has been one of those cards that's like quietly overtuned for a long time, so I'm not surprised to see it complete to go at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, if you want to contextualize it a bit, like from a historical perspective, I clearly remember in 2019 the situation for killers in Crim. This is just before Ashes. It was quite grim. Like the discussions we're having: do we import nanotech for 1 influence, but it's really bad against Anansi? So do we import Shrike for 2 influence, or do we play the very expensive Golden? Like it was like a bit of an absurd situation, and like I think we try to correct that. So if you look at, for example, what I think will be the default killer in Crim in the future, which is Carmen, which compared to Bookhalter has an install cost of 3, Carmen has an install cost of 5, but if you made a run, you get a 2 discount, so it costs the same. Bookhalter base strength 1, Carmen base strength 2. Bookhalter is 1 to boost, 1 to break, but you get the first time you fully break a sentry, you get you just get 2 credits. While Carmen is 1 credit to break a subroutine, 2 credits to boost by 3. So again, Carmen has like a few awkward breakpoints, mostly drafter, and yeah, if against smaller stuff, you just don't get a discount. Like it just actually costs you money to break like a tithe or something. So, but with that said, in 2019, if you offered criminals Carmen, they would have just jumped on it and just used that everywhere because like it's okay, it's fine. Like it does the job. It just turns money into breaking killers, and it doesn't like it's not super awkward anywhere. As I said, except maybe drafter, but it's like, yeah, I think it just highlights how like Bookhalter kind of pushed it a bit too far, and Carmen like seems to be like, actually, this is where like more in the place where we want to be for killers to exist.
And one thing I might actually take a second to shout out about this is, of course, for Crim, there's recurring credits for breakers in faction. There's Sesva. Like I've played against rigs where they get down a Sesva and they just run through a tithe every turn for profit. Like,
yeah,
your Mopus click.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I actually don't mind necessarily that too much. Like it's kind of like it requires like not really like cooperation, but it requires to like res a specific piece of ice, and the runner needs to have the breaker and also needs the shares
Yes,
there.
It's definitely not a broken, like overpowered interaction by itself, but it's another source where the Golfer credits are not just making breaking sentries more efficient, they're making breaking everything else more efficient too.
Yeah, it's effectively like you reach a situation where Scorp is like, I need to ice this because essentially you just open the server up as a sec testing like thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, I think it's interesting just when you think about early Netrunner, like you didn't include a lot of sentries, but your whole like there was a big thing about, you know, Ichi 1.0 like being like this big deal sentry kind of thing. And so like your sentries like hit hard, but they were kind of expensive for both sides. And then like what we've seen since Begalta release is that really like the only sentries you see a lot of are usually ones that are like super cheap to res and have some additional effect that costs stuff. So like Turnpike has been like the only sentry that NBN plays, and like HB will only play Drafter because it's like, you know, it's still cheap enough that you can justify firing it and get some value out of it if they don't have Begalter down. And that, you know, so it's just like the whole everything that Corpse did got kind of warped by Begalter, and it's definitely worth, you know, there's always going to be some kind of, or Begalter was just so much better than all of the other killers that like that was the thing that you chose your killers around or your sentries around, and there wasn't a lot of space for Corpse in that zone. Do we want to move on to the Corp bans? Maybe we'll do Obokata last. We can talk about Tithonium next, maybe.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Tithonium, it's a big barrier, and sorry, that's like I don't know. In a way, I think this is very red sand card, which looks like it just does a lot, and it's all slightly unexpected. It's the whole, okay, it's 9 to res for a 5-cost barrier. Okay, it's like a big barrier, and then you say actually, but sometimes you can actually decide to res it for 0, so you can't. You can deny credit denial if have an agenda scored, which is okay, fine. And then, to be fair, actually, that's a big thing why people use this a lot, because Jameson loves this ice. And then for some reason you can't host cards on this, and it just doesn't happen. Okay, and then you look at the subroutines, and that's the expectation of barriers. Oh yeah, they end the run, and you know sometimes they do slightly bad thing, like maybe a net damage, maybe 2 if they're big, or like or like Hagen, which says trash a non-breaker program. And if you look at Tithonium, it says trash a program, trash a resource, and end the run, which is extremely punishing. So it's it doesn't see that much play in the current metagame. For 2 reasons, in my opinion. One is the fractor that sees the most play is Paperclip, and Paperclip just breaks this for 4 credits. So you don't really want to res a 9-cost card. The main res cost, you don't want to spend the main res cost to just have it broken for Paperclip for 4. It's next I use it, I usually try to res it for the alternate cost. So again, that limits it in the space that I want to play. Now, the thing with this is Paperclip is rotating, and suddenly you actually need to look at every other fractor and see how they break Tithonium. And it turns out that Tithonium is like at least 6 credits for like anything to break. And because the subroutines are so punishing, you kind of, like as the runner, you can't really afford them to fire. So it's a combination of, you need to, if you expect a Tithonium, you need to be ready to say, okay, I need to have something that answers Tithonium. So I need to have a fractor. And usually this kind of play pattern where it says like, okay, I might reach the nasty stuff, I just need my killer installed. But no, this changes the play pattern. I need my killer installed because there might be like a very nasty sentry, which is expected for sentries. But you might also get a very nasty barrier here. And then once you have the pleasure of actually encountering this and need to break it, you need to spend 6 credits. And unless you can like combine it with some other cost to lower its strength or improve the strength of your breakers, or destroy it with like a hippo or something like that, it's going to cost you 6 credits to break all the time, which is actually pretty taxing, even with the current very strong economy. Already this just makes this ice kind of barely palatable, if like it's like borderline problematic. Now on top of that, Null Signal, we were developing the new runner, Arisana, whose theme is heavily based on Trojans. Now, Trojans are programs that are hosted on ice, and Tithonium says you can't host this on ice. And what was found is that, like Tithonium in a meta where you don't have access to Paperclip, like suddenly you can actually afford to res it sometimes with a 9 cost, and sometimes you could even try to surprise the runner and like sacrifice and sack an agenda, because you can just like res it for 0, and you can say actually it's worth having this very scary face check and very taxing eyes in the deck. So it was more commonly splashed, and it also, what that meant is that we have this new runner ID that's meant to showcase, hey, play with the Trojans, even though Arisana is a bit more general than that. But fundamentally, it still has a very Trojan-heavy theme, and we felt that it would essentially be kind of unplayed, because like, oh, but people will just splash Tithoniums because it's just generically a good card. So it's like the combination of all 3 of these things, it's kind of breaking a bunch of design patterns, and in terms of like gameplay, it's kind of really difficult for runners to interact with, or like it kind of really slows down like how runners are likely to interact with Corp, and it really messes with an existing design. So like all these reasons together mean that this is getting banned.
Makes sense. I guess Ali or Allison or Thrantar, either of you got any thoughts before we move on to the Obo ban and the?
I just want to offer one more thought on Tithonium subs. Right now, the most common fractor is Paperclip, and also the bin breakers in general. So if Tithonium subs fire, you trash, an MKL for the Black Orchestra, and you're down some credits, and that's annoying. But they'll be back. Like, you're not... There are programs that you can lose, and that are a pain. But also, your breakers will be back. If your MKL gets split up by Tithonium, oh well, it's 2 credits to reinstall it.
No, this is actually like a really good point. It's the what the Hebrew breakers do is they give you this resilience to rig shooting, in the sense that like if you lose your rig, the tempo hit is effectively you having to reinstall them. You don't need to find other copies or try to find dedicated recursion tools for that. Like you just go, oh, okay, this was bad, but it's like it turns it, like as you mentioned, if you have the scenario where you use like lose an MK Ultra and Black Orchestra, and you need to reinstall them both, suddenly this becomes a 5 cost face check, which is not horrific by any means. It depends on what resource you lose, though.
It does.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
certainly
so
still
one-
some bugs.
Sorry, Allison, go ahead.
Sorry. Yep. So yeah, one thing that I think is very annoying about Tithonium is that as a runner, you can kind of get a sense of what ice could these face down cards be based on the credits that the corp has available. But then as soon as a corp scores a single single agenda, Tithonium could be anywhere, no matter how many credits they have. And you have that sort of thing with Archer that it like turns on as soon as the game continues to agenda score. But that at least has 4 credits, and this one is literally 0.
Yeah.
Archer is also a sentry.
Yes, that too. So now you need 2 different breakers in order to feel safe without breaking something that's way undercosted.
Yeah, and I think like if you compare, there is obviously one other barrier destroyer, but Hagen is very specific in that it can't actually destroy your rig. It just can destroy your utility programs, which sometimes is worse, but is definitely a little bit more of a reasonable take on the Tithonium space, I think. And it is just like, it seems like it's part of the game design, and we also saw this with the DNA tracker rotation and being I'm not going to replace is not the right word, but like softly replaced with a teeny, which is a much softer face check early in the game. I think makes, kind of suggests that NSG is trying to move back towards, hey, if you have your killer out, ice can do stuff to you that you don't want, but it's not going to set back your entire game, most likely. Okay. Should we talk about Obo finally?
A quick note is Tithonium actually got, I think it's the band that got the most pushback from what I heard. And I wasn't expecting that. I was actually expecting the Obokata band to be...
Yeah.
Well, Obokata has precedent, right? That it was restricted for a while, but Tithonium this is the last standard rotation before it's gone, so it's kind of weird to have a card that's been there forever and now is just gone.
Yeah. And the card that was seeing 0 play go straight to ban list is, I think, something that sometimes ruffles people's feathers, but I think your explanation, at least to me, seems pretty reasonable.
It sees some play. Also, it's a Red Sand card. Red Sand card are fair game. They're just, this is a weird space. Just accept that. I don't know. To me, Red Sand cards are not very well thought out occasionally, and it's yes. Oh look, it's a Red Sand card that we banned. Another one.
Oh look, a theme here. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like if you've played any standard at all in the last year, like Obokata Protocol, and you have deep thought, you have very visceral thoughts about it. And like I will just say very quickly, like I am very glad this is going. It was not like an unbeatable card, but boy was it an unfair card. So
yeah, I think to talk about this ban, I think I'd rather just mention the new card as well, because I think
yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think this is probably the best way. So let's compare these two.
Yeah, so this new card is Fuji Asset Retrieval. It's a 5/3. It is an agenda Ambush Security. When this agenda is scored or stolen, do 2 net damage. This, of course, in comparison to Obokata Protocol, which says, as an additional cost to steal, the runner must suffer 4 net damage.
So the key thing here is we don't really want to have both of these available in Corp decks. Like, one of the issues with Obokata is you can, like, the Corp's hiding about half the points in a lot of damage. Like, yeah. And like, if you just had access to both Fuji Asset Retrieval and Obokata, it's just like you have so many points just hidden behind damage. And then with all the compound in terms of damaging guys you can play and snares and ambushes, it just becomes so easy for runners to just like run out of cards and be unable to steal stuff, which I think is one of the biggest criticism of Obokata Protocol here, is that it enabled a very attrition heavy play style where the decks that literally just hide the Obokatas, and then until you reach a point, oh hi runner, you have 3 cards less, I'm just going to start scoring these slowly. And yeah, that's I mean, one of the things, yeah, it's been in the game for a while. I mean, like, I think if you played Standard in the past few years, like, you definitely know that what Obokata does and what it does to the game. I'm not saying it's the only playstyle you can play Obokata. It's just like including Obokata in your deck just turns on an attrition win condition for you, where you can just like either revert back to that as a backup, but historically we have also seen decks where the main win condition is literally run out of cards and then end up with like 9 unstealable points, which is not very nice.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is like this swap gives players at minimum 4 HP back if they're trying to steal Obokatas to win or steal a 5/3 from some kind of net damage grinder to win the game, which is I think a pretty big change. So we came into talking about Fuji Asset Retrieval as in the context of the Obo ban, but I do want to make sure we talk about this card on its own merits. So I don't know, Thrantar or Allison, if either of you want to have some initial thoughts on this card.
It's kind of hard to. You go first. Okay. Okay, so yeah, it's kind of hard to view it as its own thing rather than just how does this compare to Obokata for now. But at least I do like that the scoring is a bonus, that Obokata gets you 3 points, obviously, but scoring it always feels kind of bad of just like, I spent so much and all I get are these points. What else? Could be getting something better for it. And this one gets 2 net damage, which at least will slow them down a little bit more. So I like that reward. It's kind of better in a deck that is able to score it than Obokata was, 100%. And yeah, another quick rules question. Obokata, you cannot score to win if you don't have 4 cards in your hand. This one, if you have 4 points, I think you can steal it fine and win before you lose.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah, so this is almost quietly a threat card, which like kind of I think shows why threat works well with the game, or like why it kind of fits in. And it's like threat has kind of been around in a couple weird ways, but this card kind of says at threat 4, this agenda no longer does its net damage on steal. But yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking about that after listening to a podcast the other day. It's not a super insightful thing. I do think a card to shout out that like works very differently with this than Obo did is Neurospike, which, you know, now suddenly we've got 5 damage, maybe 6 if we're in PE, so maybe we can make up some forks and stuff from here. Thrantar, I know you've been having some audio issues, but I don't know if you've got any thoughts to chime in with here. All right, I would take that as maybe a no for now. I think like this card is gonna make a huge, like, the fact that this isn't Obokata is gonna have huge repercussions for Jinteki. and I don't know exactly what the faction is going to look like with this card instead of Obo.
Yeah, it's like the consequences. I think are like it's a bit unclear to me. I think decks that just wanted the defensive part of a Bukata might actually find this lackluster, and I don't know, like a Glacier is definitely comparing this to, say, bacterial programming or send a message. And previously it was like, yes, you play your Bukata because it's just so good. And now there's a bit more, I think the other two have a bit more equity, where it's, yeah. But like what decks that actually really like Fuji Asset Retrieval are definitely those that can lean on the score ability. So as you mentioned, Eurospike. So I think I will definitely try a 6 agenda Restoring Humanity. That's probably just going to play 3 of Fuji Asset Retrieval, 3 Bacterial Programming, and then fork the runner between Neurospike and Punitive Counter-Strike. And what's interesting is now, instead of the agendas being the cost, the runner can't, if they suspect that you're in a punitive plan, they can't just access the Obo card and says, actually, I think I'm not going to survive the punitive, leave this. They'll access this, take 2 damage, and go, oh, I need to survive the multiple punitives that you expect later on. The other ID that was mentioned would be like various PE decks, especially more shell gamey ones that play Mitosis and Moonpool, where they try to hide a bunch of stuff, and then you check like an Urtica cipher and then realize, actually, I need to draw up cards, and then you get a surprise. Yeah, Fuji Asset Retrieval. The other thing I'd like to mention is actually like the art on Fuji Asset Retrieval. Like, I actually only like looked at the art properly recently, like the art and the flavor text, and it's like, it's really grim. It's like, like I don't hate it, but like I realize like this is like highlighting some of like the darker stuff humanity can do. Like it's really, yeah.
Yeah, no, for
Yeah.
sure. All right,
Yeah.
we do. It sounds like we do actually have Thrantar back now, so I want to make sure that you get a chance to talk about Fuji Asset Retrieval as well.
So I was going to mention the interaction potential with Punitive, but I think that's already been covered. The other thing I was going to give a shout out to was Fetal AI.
Yeah. Let me pull that up. There we go.
Which is, I think, overall pretty clearly worse than Fuji Asset Retrieval, but was something that was run, from my understanding, quite a bit for a while. And another thing that Fuji Asset Retrieval can do alongside potentially Sting is, while I would say you want to dump it in Archives to be Archives poison, it is Archives poison, even if it does have drawbacks. But talking about Punitive, if you put 2 Fuji Asset Retrievals in Archives and the runner touches it and doesn't win, they're losing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. It's going to be hard for the runner to deal with 10 damage to the face real fast. I want to answer very quickly. Carrie Potter is asking, can Fuji help scoring a Blood in the Water? And the answer is yes. You can score if you have multiple, like if you can score as many agendas as you want during your action phase in a paid ability window. So if you score a Fuji Asset Retrieval and that takes a runner down to 0 cards in hand, you can then score a Blood in the Water that's also on the table without any issues. So, you know, maybe we'll see some PE combo decks go for this as a backup line on the Neurospike punitive kill.
Yeah. Actually, the other synergy I realized is, and that was related to the mention of Archives Poison, is if you just put Fuji Asset Retrieval in Archives, if the runner suspects it there, they might, you know, be cautious about running Archives, so that you have a good chance of just scoring it out with a Regenesis and going up to 4 points.
Yeah, you can Regenesis out of Archives. And that's especially like just a mean fork with Punitive again, right? It's okay, go check Archives, take 2, and then have to be ready to fight this Trace. Punitive's what, base 5?
Yeah.
Either make this trace 5 or take another 3, or I'm just going to score Regenesis, and it's a 3-4. Like, I'm happy to play a 3-4 agenda, even if it's got some hoops to go through.
Yeah.
The
3-4 is a good stat line for sure.
Yeah. The other thing I'd like to mention is, like, this is very strong, but I think, like, there are various runner counterplays. Like, obviously, to the punitive one, it's just, be very rich. And I think to the various neurospike folks, and also to punitive folks, I think there's a good chance that runners, I think, are already incentivized to run ways of taking a bunch of damage. So in faction, I'm considering like Steelskin in Anarch, class acting Crim, like preemptively play a class act, or playing Stone Ship chart rooms in Shaper. I think those are all ways of like playing around. I think the fact that all 3 of these runner cards are playable, Stone Ship chart room a bit less, but like the other 2 are extremely strong. Stone Ship chart room is okay, but like they're all, none of these cards make me go, oh, this is like a completely dedicated tech card, and it does like. The other thing is, I think it mostly slows down the kill potentially. Like what it does is it go like, oh no, you're not losing the game. I'm just scoring 3 points. Okay. Or it's
fair.
worse for punitive, but yeah. Like I think it introduces the right type of tension to the game.
Cool. Yeah, I am hoping that it creates more positive play patterns than Obo did.
Also,
but with that,
you mentioned it's security. It's a security agenda, so the Archivist can have it stay in the limelight.
Isn't the Archivist rotating with? Oh no, Archivist is still around. Oh wow.
It's Red Sand.
Augustus, I'm gonna, in the interest of our time, I will say, Augustus's question was, I was wondering about thoughts on cards that avoided the ban, notably Healing, and like all of the Anarch efficiency cards. Do you have like a quick-ish answer? I know you talked about that a little bit in the article.
Yeah, I think it like partly it's a timing thing, and I think I'm gonna try to be quick because I really need to leave after this. But effectively, I think the absolute meta collapse to just pure Valley Hoshiko is actually relatively recent. Like it only really started in like mid-June. Like before that, we actually had like a reasonably like kind of the meta was a bit healthier, I think, runner side. And like I do think there's a like generally this I don't think the problem is as simple as Hoshiko's 2 and just needs like a ban hammer. Like I think it's a bit more complex than that. But fundamentally, one aspect is generic value cards are so good and so plentiful in Anarch that there's no point in playing anything like more focused. Like runners will always play a bunch of generic cards, but there's no point in playing anything more focused because you can just play the generic stuff that don't have any interdependence, so you just play generically good cards. So that's a problem that needs solving, but the problem is both a combination of like there are a few very strong value cards, so things like Paladin Poemu or Fermenter that allow you when the game goes slow, like they just generate so much value for the Anarch, but it's also just how broadly available these various value cards are. So again, it needs but there's also like we need to be careful to not overban, because obviously like a lot of strategies rely on like a seed level of like generic value cards. So again, we need to find the right trade-off, and the trade-off is it's probably not sufficient to just ban like 1 or 2 of the key pieces. We need to make sure that there's enough that goes away. And like the example I can use is, for example, Fermenter used to be excellent, but it used to not see much play while Rizeki was legal, because Rizeki was an easier source of credits. So if you just remove like maybe like the expectation, I think if you remove like the top layer, and it's probably not enough to just like have a meaningful nerf to Anarch. But again, all this takes playtesting time.
Yep.
The next,
Oh, I would say, like, rather, we don't. I wasn't looking to get the whole rationale on everything.
Yeah.
I think a good enough, to me, the answer I was maybe expecting was basically, we wanted to, this was probably what the set was play tested with, plus or minus a couple
Yeah.
cards, presumably.
Yeah.
And you want to see how that meta shakes out for a little bit, see if cards shift around what's good and what's not before coming in aggressively with a banhammer. But if if things look different, SBT will be watching the imminent Continentals. So
yes, yeah. Actually, like another point that's more related to that is how like it looks like just these value-based decks are too good at answering everything the course throws at them, so they can just play really reactive. So, but we hope that this rotation and the new cards kind of break this paradigm somewhat, and we'll keep an eye out on what happens. And again, stuff like healing, I think we'll see how it happens. Like it's weakened because there's no Bokata. Again, keep an eye out, but like not entirely happy with necessarily the state of healing. I'm personally not happy with, say, pinhole threading, which I think is just too generic an answer that runners have. But yeah, I think.
All right. Well,
I
with
hope this was. Yeah.
With all that said, let's move on to our first set of spoilers from the ShadowNet. The ShadowNet. Which people should definitely go listen to. Phil and Eric did a great job. And this is the first card that they spoiled. This is the price. This is a one-cost event. Oh, and Dan, are you trying to leave? Is that what you're...
Yeah, I'm trying to say goodbye. So, goodbye. It was good having me. Well, I had a good time. I hope I didn't monopolize too much this episode so far. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on, Dan.
Have a good night.
Bye. All right, so we've got the price. This is an event. Trash the top 4 cards of your stack. You may install one of those cards, paying 3 credits less. And this is 2 influence. All right, so Thrantar and Allison, what are your? It's just the 3 of us now. We got to carry the rest of the show.
First thing I want to know is whether the price of the price is right. And I'm not entirely sold.
Interesting. How are you looking at this card?
Okay, so what I'm seeing is we're getting a card, an install, so that's 1 click, 2 clicks, and then we're netting 2 credits. So pure value, this proposition is looking pretty solid. We're in like sure gamble territory-ish. That's fine. However, this does not have the safety rails that like Gachapon does. The things I trash, they're gone. There's value with Steelskin. I would say Steelskin triggers when it's trashed from the stack. Though I have to go double check Steelskin.
It does. Yep.
So there's potential value there. There's potential value, like you could play District 99 and like trash a program with this or something. But you don't have the insurance built in of Gachapon, where you pick the thing you want, and then you pick the next 3 things that you'll want later, and only 2 things go away forever. Now, it's granted they go away way more forever in Gachapon's case, but...
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess when I think about it, like you were saying, like, oh, this gets you 1 card, and then also makes you some credits. And then like
install.
And then install. So it's kind of like it's getting you a card install. It's getting you a card, an install, and 3 credits at the cost of 1. So that's a sure gamble of value. To me, this looks like it's a little bit beyond a sure gamble of value, because you're not actually seeing 1 card, you're seeing 4 and getting the best one out of those 4.
Yes.
Now
there's definitely some potential upside.
Yeah.
And in a world where we've got Nobukata instead, maybe we don't need to count all of the cards in our deck to perfection, and can have some space for more tempo things. But yeah, also Gachapon, paintability. You can hit a barrier and maybe find or hit an ice, maybe find a breaker for it. The price, well, you pay the price and you get what you get, and then you've got what you've got.
Yeah, I will say we should also very quickly mention that the price can also trigger strike fund. So there's now two event targets that you can hit off of the price, that will give you money or cards on the way, and you get to gain the credits or draw the cards before you make the choice on what to install with the price, which may be relevant in some cases.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think I'm coming down on the very much the opposite side of Thrantar here, that this looks fantastic to me, because there's obviously the disadvantage of eventually you reach the bottom of your deck, but until then, this is basically saying choose 4 cards from the next 4 cards and get a 2 credit discount on them. And like any card in your deck is going to be pretty great if it's 2 credits cheaper. I think there are very few cards you'd be happy to play in every single deck if they were 2 credits shorter.
You one important thing to say is this does not hit any card. You install one of those cards. You trash, say, a Dirty Laundry, a Tutushka, and a Gamble, and like something. Well, that's something like either it's an event or whatever it is, you're playing it because it's your choice. Like, or you're not playing it, in which case you've spent a credit to trash the top 4 cards of your stack. Like, this has a lot of upside, but you need an entire package. And again, if you're adding steel skins, if you're adding strike funds, that does increase the value of trashes, but like those are also not things that are hits. They're not things you can install off the price for that 3 credit discount.
Yeah, definitely. I think missing is a real bummer, that you want to build your deck in a way that's very low chance. But because it's a full installable and not like Career Pharaohs only on resources or modded is only on hardware programs, I think the average deck has unless you're really leaning into events, probably 10, 15 events, 20 at the high end, and that leaves more than enough in your deck that you're going to be pretty assured to get at least 1 hit, more likely 2.
This also wants you to have slightly more expensive installables. Like if I play the price and install, an SMC, right? Okay, like it's good to have an SMC in play, but I've now paid 1 credit, so in the future I can spend 2 credits to finally do a thing. I haven't used the discount. And if all of the installables in my deck cost 3 or more, I'm going to have hands where, like, I draw my opening hand, I go, this has, 2 Liberateds and 2 programs, so I'm going to toss it back because that's not, playable. You can just have these really awkward, expensive hands if you're trying to have enough expensive stuff that you actually can use the full discount. And if you're not using the full discount, you're just losing value.
I mean, you are losing value. I think an obvious comparison that Jason is calling out in the chat is Street Peddler. And Street Peddler has some advantages over the price in that, once again, it's at paidability speed, kind of like Gachapon does. But it sees fewer cards and gives a cheaper install costs discount. And people played Street Peddler constantly, and I constantly whiffed on Street Peddler and never, while I was sad, it was often because I couldn't get to pop that Street Peddler. It was just a thing that you played and you ended up being pretty happy about. And I think, you mentioned SMC, and I think it's a really interesting dynamic where if you're playing a card like the price, I think you're right, you don't want SMC in your deck, But I think conveniently, SMC and the price are doing pretty similar things, where they're letting you dig through your deck at a much higher speed than would be normally available to you. So I don't know. I'm pretty high on this card, but I think you're right, Thrantar, that this card doesn't come in for free in every Anarch deck.
Yeah. I think this has some. It can generate some high highs. Like if you just play this on turn one, trash either a strike fund or a steel skin, and then install a daily casts. Like this is just excellent. That's such a good turn one. But
Yeah, I guess
it's pretty demanding also of how you build your deck, I think.
I mean, to me, like you're obviously not going to play this in a Ghost Tongue deck, but if I think about what Anarchs are playing a lot of right now, they're like, okay, I'll play Sure Gambles, I'll play Dirty Laundries, I'll play some Moshings because I need to get the Bin Breaker cycle through my hand, I'll play some Steel Skins. And that's about where they stop usually with events that they're really excited to run. And
Yeah.
so, that means probably it's going to be pretty unlikely. I think you'll whiff entirely. And then it's about, am I going to hit cards that I'm excited about enough of the time to include at that point to me, more so than am I going to struggle? Like, yeah, S is probably not going to run the price, but I would not be surprised if a more generic Anarch does.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is something that a deck building tool that you can use for this kind of card is if you Google hypergeometric calculator. It can you build your deck, you can see what the odds of getting 1, 2, 3 hits are using that.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Do we want to talk about the next card? Because I actually think it's not. I think there's some relationship between these that is interesting to talk about.
Yeah, we can talk about the next card.
So this card is Audrey version 2 or V2. This is a 3-cost 2MU program icebreaker AI virus. So all of the subtypes. This art should look familiar to anyone who's been watching my my intro screens. Whenever you trash a card you are accessing, place 1 virus counter on this program. Interface, hosted virus counter, break up to 2 subroutines, trash a card from your grip, plus 3 strength. And then and this is a 0 strength, 3 influence program with the flavor text, what do you want from me? Blood? Seymour.
So I see we've got some theater folks at NSG.
Yes.
Yeah, I was all prepared to nerd out about that, but I think we all got this.
So I guess I might ask, like, and this is a bit more quizzy than is maybe fair, why might I be excited about playing Audrey and the price together in a single deck? I guess I'll just...
I think there's some inherent synergy with being able to trash cards from your grip and trash cards from the top of your deck that both strike fund and still skin work off of that, and so they just kind of all fit together in a synergistic pile there.
Yeah, also the cost 3 is a nice, like, this is just sort of the size of the thing that I think you want to hit with the price. I don't think that's a major synergy, but
yeah, I think those are both...
tempo can be nice.
I think those are both really good points. I think, and this is probably me not setting up this question very well, I think the thing that's exciting to me about this is that Audrey looks like it could potentially be an engine to be my primary breaker. And so in that case, I'm going to want to find this as quickly as possible so that I can start to charge it up before the corp gets their defenses up. And the price is a great way for me to say the most important card in my deck right now is Audrey V2. Let's try and find it. And so that's the sort of situation where I feel like there's this use of the price that's like, oh, I'm just going to install a card for value and hope to get some steel skin and strike fund, But now we also get to say, oh, I can have an impactful tool, and I have another way to reach it and get it onto the board pretty quickly.
So I see that this potentially really accelerates freedom.
Can you talk a little bit more about that while I go pull up the ID?
I'm also pulling up the ID, so
Yep, I've also got it up on screen if you wanna look at the Discord that the Discord
Okay.
screen I'm sharing. I don't know if that's
Um,
big enough for you to see.
So one, freedom just tremendously opens up the types of things that you can trash, which is going to be one of Audrey's biggest issues. Is if you run and you see a hedge fund, you see a hedge fund,
Mm-hmm.
and then you move on with your day. And like you don't want to see a hedge fund with freedom necessarily because five's a lot, but say seamless, right? You run and see a seamless. You can find a virus counter to trash it as Kamalo and get your virus counter back for Audrey. And Kamalo can definitely run into issues where he needs to build a big rig and have like sub virus counters that have accumulated for Yusef, for Mizazi, get his Nopkira down to start building up those virus counters, get some fermenters down, and taking some bot, because it can be your only breaker by itself, and you can just go in and trash things normally and get virus counters, and then you can come back and trash things using Kamala's ability potentially and get virus counters. And Audrey's not once per turn. Kamalo is, but Audrey isn't. Like you could potentially Audrey in, trash something with Kamalo, Audrey back in, trash something with Imp, right?
Yeah.
Or even if you want to go really fancy, you could do something like by any means, right? If you really want to just go, all right, we're getting a pile of virus counters, you just go by any means, and then you just run 3 things, you trash them all, you blow up a remote, and Audrey's whenever. Like there's no limit. If you go disarm, like if you light the fire, a Keeling and 3 Waroids, that's 4 virus counters. Actually, I have to double check how light the fires.
Yeah.
I don't
So
know if light the fire works. Light the fire
unfortunately,
axes.
light the fire
But-
won't work.
But you can still run that remote if you've got way too many credits or way too much link.
Yeah.
And you can trash a remote with 4 upgrades in it and get 4 virus counters.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think the like being able to play this, like I think against asset decks, this does look like potentially a solo breaker. Against like multi upgrade decks, that play pattern of like I get in and blow up your entire remote and that feeds me through the rest of the game will be interesting. I also do want to shout out, Jason called out, because the boost strength is a paid ability, you can do that at any time, so you can discard Steel Skin and Strike Funds in any paid ability window if you need to for some reason, which does give Audrey a little bit of extra oomph.
Yep. So I think the obvious comparison for Audrey in some ways, as like big virus-based AI breaker, is God of War.
I was thinking Amakua, but kind of 2 of those.
Okay, I mean Amaku is also a pretty but I mean, Turtle's very good. Which reminds me, of course, this is a virus. It's 3 influence. You could import into Crim and fight it with Asmund Pudlat. You could import Audrey and Asmund Pudlat into like Shaper or something if you really wanted. He's only 2 influence. It's annoying, but like you can afford them. I don't think this is really where anyone wants to be at. Or you could bring, Asmund into Anarch and just have a toolbox of viruses where you've got like Audrey, and you've of course got a fermenter, and you've got your botch lists, and like you're just going to have something useful to find with your 2 virus tutors. If
Elson, I want to make sure that you get a chance to share some thoughts on Audrey here. So,
Yeah, so I think that as a primary breaker, it could be rough because outside of asset decks, you're kind of almost always spending at least 1 virus counter to get 1 back. So that doesn't add up to a good option. But I think kind of as a supplemental thing, it could be useful. Like this is creditless breaking, which is very helpful. So it could just be a kind of value breaker that if something has a lot of subs, if you've trashed a couple things and built up some resources, a secondary option, it's good. The problem there is, of course, that it's 2 memory, so you kind of need, if you're looking for a full virus suite or a full breaker suite plus this, you probably need to be running this, what's the knob curry or virus in. Yeah. And then on the flavor, I think I do want to point out that so Audrey 2, it's Little Shop of Horrors is a movie music and a musical, and then a movie again that had a evil plant that demanded blood and sacrifice. So it's cute here because it's both you trash someone else's stuff to get the virus counter, and you trash your own stuff to boost up its strength. And that's kind of reflecting the movie of Seymour first feeds his own blood to it and then starts getting blood from other people. And then something that I just realized earlier is that the structure of Little Shop of Horrors is a bit of a Faustian bargain, that the Seymour makes sacrifices to the semi-demonic thing in order to get benefits of himself. And Audrey V2 is a variation on Faust. Yep.
Yeah, when you both said like, "Oh, Audrey reminds me of big AI," I was like, "Okay, cool. I've got Faust typed in, hit 0," and then you guys zagged on me with God of War and Amakua, which are both also reasonable includes, but it was definitely had to quickly type and change course there. So, yeah, I think talking about Faust for just a second, Faust was like really powerful for a short period of time. Well, not that short a period of time, but for a period of time, often because of combinations of cards like Wild Side that allowed you to draw a lot. And we don't like the Anarch draw package is a little bit weaker right now, which I think is part of why Hoshiko is so dominant. So it might be that like Audrey just requires more draw than Anarch is able to supply. Though we are also seeing, we've seen yesterday, we saw 2 different ways the Anarchs can draw cards. So maybe that will start to add up.
Also, this ability to trash 1 card from your grip is, again, excellent at confirm discards for District 99.
That's true as well. Yeah, I didn't pull that one up earlier, but I always find this card a little bit slow, but I guess you know what? It's a 3-cost card that we can install off the price, so maybe that's enough to get me turned around on it. Because yeah, we can trigger District 99 off of throwing a card away to Audrey. So cool.
It costs 3. It's got potential charge synergy. I do think it's slow, but
yeah,
if you're willing to go that slow, it can offer a lot of power.
Cool. All right, let's hop over to the next Anarch card. I think actually the last Anarch card that we got spoiled on the show. This is Banner. This is a 4-cost 1 MU program icebreaker fractor weapon, and this says interface 2 credits, break subroutines on the barrier you are. Excuse me, does not say break subroutines on it anywhere at all. That's my bad. Interface 2 credits. Subroutines on the barrier you are encountering cannot end the run for the remainder of this encounter. It is 5 base strength and 3 influence. So Allison, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this card first.
This is this kind of breaker that I'm always very hesitant about, of the sort of it's okay for a breaker to have a bad matchup with particular ice, that you spend a whole bunch to get through of it, but just the outright not being able to handle some things is rough. That, like, I think Hagen is probably common enough that if you're running this as a primary breaker, you're just not playing any non-icebreaker programs. And Bran might be played more as it comes up and it's just 1 strength too big, and then suddenly, so you need something to boost up the strength here, which is going to generally be a non-icebreaker program, which matches up badly against Hagen. So it kind of has to be, you have to be confident on who you're playing against, which I never feel confident doing.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, if my opponent is like playing for some reason like an Echo or an Endless Eula, like, I'm pretty happy about having a Banner in my deck because I get to just walk through those and they can't do anything to me. But for those barriers that do have these other effects, Banner is going to have a downside, and so I think it's going to be an interesting question of how much Banner's downside ends up mattering. Thrantar, are you back? Cannot. Okay. Jason called out Raindrops Cut Stone as well, which this does synergize because Raindrops Cut Stone just cares that the subroutine resolved, not that it did its intended effect. And so we can Banner, hit a big, hit that Endless Eula, and now you get to draw 6 cards and net plus a credit on the run, which seems pretty fun.
Yeah, this is also a Mercury synergy of that the subroutines are resolving, but you didn't break any of them, so you still get your extra access.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that the Mercury synergy is also really interesting. Do you think this is worth importing into Mercury?
I mean, criminals are kind of a little bit rough on barrier breakers right now anyway, unless you're going cybernetics and have Tremello. Next
So
best option is Corroder probably as an import anyway.
So 3 is not Harbilant Influence, and this does have the weapon subtype, so Asmund Pudlat can go find your banner.
Yep. Yeah.
And hand deliver it.
Asmund Pudlat, he was ahead of his time. But yeah, I think it's, I don't know, I think it's really cool to see a kind of Mercury synergy out of faction. Criminal tends to be the faction that like gets other people's synergy cards, and then because they're so boring, it's hard to synergize with. So it's kind of cool to see something pop up across the factions. But yeah, Thrantar, do you have other thoughts on Banner here? Oh. Okay, looks like we may have lost him again. Okay. So yeah, I don't know. I'll be really interested to see how Banner lands. I think if we end up in a world where there's lots of barriers and they don't do too many mean things, we could definitely look at, Banner being part of the meta. It is a little bit pricey, right? It's 1 more than Cleaver, and for really cheap barriers, it's probably more expensive. But I think it's definitely got, it'll be an interesting one to see. Next up, we have the card that was spoiled on Stim Slack. This is Beatrice Freire Gonzalez. This is a 2-cost resource connection subtype. And her ability is click, click, run HQ. If successful, instead of breaching HQ, breach R&D. When you do, access 1 additional card. This is 3 influence. So Allison, did you get to see this card right before, or was the stream kind of the first chance?
Yeah, I snuck into Slack and dug that one up, and it looks really cool. Like it's reminding of Sneak Door Beta, of just these suddenly making an extra central server relevant. And like HQ already does stuff, so it's not quite that go from archives doing nothing to being a very relevant server. But this is nice that if you are like, if you're Shaper and you're boosting up a whole bunch of extra effects from R&D breaches of if you're playing a Kiko Nisai for some reason, then this is probably a good option of just making sure that even if they ice up R&D really hard, you have a different option to go to. I think there's also something to be said for this being useful for mark effects, that even if you want to run on an R&D and your mark ends up rolling HQ, you can still do that run. And then it just has an additional access attached to it, which is kind of justifies that extra click.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Solomir shouting out that it works in chat, shouting out that it works with Wake, or Wake Implant.
Works really well with Wake Implant, yeah.
Yeah, so you get to make it the run is successful on HQ, and then you can immediately spend that power counter to see a 3rd card on R&D, and that's potentially kind of interesting. It's funny that you're Allison, you were talking about it lets you turn a server that's worthless into a worthwhile server, and it is kind of funny about the state of Shaper pressure on HQ that corps basically don't have to ice HQ, and this maybe will give them some reason to ice HQ, which maybe makes this finally a Tau card. Oh, and of course I can't pull up Tau Slonga because he's got a special character in his name. I haven't fixed that bug yet, but yeah, I like this card is definitely an interesting one for Shaper. Forcing the corp to spend resources in more places is always a good thing as the runner, and this card definitely does that. And Thrantar, it sounds like you might be back.
Yeah, it seems like I'm back for right now at least. So obviously Sneak Door Beta is a very clear comparison. Beatrice has a lot of differences, though. So being a resource and not a program means that Shapers are much worse at finding it. Like, if you're a Shaper and you want to find a program, that's not hard. You could just, go ahead and get it with self-modifying code. You could, into the depths for it or something. If you want to find a connection, you need to draw it.
Yeah, we've long since.
But
yeah, no, I was just saying we've long since lost hostage. So yeah, you have to go and find this the hard way. Do you feel like you would want to?
If you want to see it...
Oh, go ahead.
Which means that if you want to see it early, if you've got early pressure built around this, you probably need 2 copies. Another really interesting difference between this and Sneak Door is that this doesn't actually change the attacked server.
Yeah, and that is definitely important for a variety of effects. Shapers have a lot of effects that say when you make a successful run on R&D, and those obviously won't get charged by Beatrice.
But it also means the other direction, that if you import this into Criminal, you're going to be getting your Steve triggers, although Steve's played more outside Criminal, I guess. And the other cybernetic that steals a credit, I forgot the name, but Panweave.
Plan weave.
You got it before I could pull it up.
Yeah, and it activates the emergency shutdown. But yeah, so that is an important difference. Makes it worse for R&D for shapers triggering off R&D, but does make it actually better for criminals. But yeah, exact same problems of 3 influence here and no way to tutor it means that relying on that is a little inconsistent.
Also, as a double, and especially because it doesn't change the attacked server, this doesn't help you quest. With Sneak Door Beta, you can like run archives, Sneak Door archives, and then run R&D, and then deep dive. But with Beatrice, you don't have that many clicks, and also all this does is give you another way to get into HQ.
Yeah, that's a very good point, that this won't enable deep dive, which is, you know, shapers would love to be able to play this card a little bit easier. I think it's one of the more interesting win conditions they've had printed in a while. But yeah, Beatrice is not going to be the most helpful for that, but is going to allow them to apply pressure to a whole nother central, which definitely has some value.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also worth noting, like,
it definitely has some good pressure.
Yeah. This is almost your entire turn, probably, because I don't think you're installing this and then waiting a turn to use it. So you're probably installing this and then using it immediately, and you only get one use out of it. And that's, 3 of your 4 clicks. So you have to be pretty ready to go to make the most out of this card.
Yeah, it's not like Conduit, where sometimes you'll just like install Conduit first click and then click your Conduit. And then like the corp has an existential threat on R&D that they need to fix that turn. Because if you get to Conduit 4, 5, 6 into 4, 5, 6, 7 into an empty R&D, like that's game.
Yeah.
And I don't think Beatrice applies that same level of immediate threat.
Yep. I do think it is kind of interesting, though, how in some ways Beatrice is a little bit like an R&D interface, because you get to see an additional card on the right away when she hits the board. You can lock R&D for 2 turns at a time. Now it comes at a much higher cost of 2 clicks, and you can't use other run events. But it is kind of an interesting point of comparison. Should we move on to the final card, or do either of you have closing thoughts on Beatrice?
I'm excited to play her. I think she's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's the same for me. That's going to be fun, just popping there and popping her in, and then surprise, I access your R&D anyway, even through those 5 ice you stacked up there.
Yeah, that's true.
Also, probably a call out of the flavor text there of telling the practical applications of what seems to be exploding foam might be dropping them on a cop car.
Elephant toothpaste, I guess.
Yes, that is definitely elephant toothpaste. As someone who has done this demo a bunch, this is definitely the elephant toothpaste. I guess in theory you could maybe say that it's releasing some hydrogen gas, but I would be shocked if there's a lot more practical applications. As a chemist, the chalkboard, I have some notes. They should have consulted some chemists first, but it's not the worst. So it is what it is. But all that said, let's move on to the final card. This one was done by... but this was done via the Saharsa bot on GLC, and if you haven't gone and done that, I think it is one of the most impressive pieces of spoiler work that anyone's done this season, and you're really, cannot recommend enough going and doing it. You find the Saharsa bot and DM it. I believe it's $quest, and it will walk you through the rest, and you can have a fantastic little 15 minutes going through a little adventure game. But at the end of that adventure...
me out.
The
wheels kept kicking me out.
Wheels kept kicking you out. Yeah, I don't...
That's true.
I also got kicked out for being a suspicious cop. Um,
Yeah,
oh,
same for me.
okay, cool. My encoder dropped for just a second, but here we are. We have the ultimate spoiler of that entire thing. This is Starlet Knight. This is a 5 to res, 2 strength, sentry, observer subtype. It has the text Threat 4. When the runner encounters this ice, it gains X and the run subroutines for the remainder of this run after its other subroutines. X is equal to the number of tag blah, 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 blah. X is equal to the number of tags the runner has. And then give the runner 1 tag, give the runner 1 tag. And this is 3 influence. So what are y'all's thoughts on this card?
Unfortunately for me, I kind of feel like it's a pretty total miss. Like, I'm never a huge fan of NBN cards in general, but this just feels very, very weak to me. Of 2 subroutines, strength 2 for 5 credits is a bad payoff anyway. And even at threat, it needs to be both threat 4 and they have to have a tag. They have to both be tagged, and for it to be a good card, they need to have a lot of tags. So it's kind of nicely there as a safety valve against tag me being fantastic. But outside of that, it feels bad to me.
So I mean, I'm thinking about what we're looking at in terms of killers potentially, and 2 strength is not an amazing number to be at. Giving the runner 2 tags for the face check is okay. And with Boom gone, maybe they only clear 1 of them, and then you can get some value out of something. I think the timing on the when encountered is really rough, because if they're running in clean, like even with the threat 4, it's not going to get to end the run subs for giving them the initial 2 tags. That's where they come back. And how many times are you running through this 5-cost sentry multiple times after the game is on 4 points? Like, at that point, it's very possible that the next steal wins the game, in which case it didn't do anything.
Okay, I think those are pretty reasonable approaches. I guess maybe my question then is, where do you feel like this? What places? What would have to be true about the game for this card to see play? Because that's always the other. If we think this card kind of missed the balance mark for whatever reason, what would have to change about the game for this to become playable?
I think people need to be a lot more willing to float tags, which I think Boom rotating alone does do, so we might be in a totally wrong context for there. And then also, I think another thing is, well, with being willing to float tags, the response to an Oppo research has to be something else other than I clear all my tags for my turn, because this does kind of force them to clear it if they want to get into a server, because like Oppo research dropping 4 tags on someone with when the threat is active, so that lines up with this effect here, means that four extra end the run subroutines makes this a lot more of an SD ice.
So I think in order for this to be good, NBN needs to move off of Bologna.
Mm-hmm. Just because you need to be able to.
Is the wrong breakpoint. If you're looking to score like below the post truth, right? Is it running 5 threes at a 2-1 or 2 to grab the last point? This looks awful, because what's going to happen is it's going to go to threat 4, it's going to come online, they're going to walk through it once, they're going to steal your Bologna, then they'll have 7 points. But if you're actually scoring off, and then you're at threat 4, and a steal is not game point, this has a lot more value. This has much greater ability to provide taxing value. If walking through it once does not win the game.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sorry, I'm trying to look up.
Also, if we see a return of stealth in a big way, which I'm not expecting, but Trickster Taka is stealth. After image exists, like after image obliterates this ice.
So I guess would the two of you prefer running something like Unsmiling Tsarevna over Starlet Knight? Or would you mostly just look to go way more expensive or way cheaper with your sentries?
I'd go bigger or smaller.
Okay.
I'd probably run Tithe over this, as just like this will force you to install your killer and like tax some credit outs on every run. And like you can run through it, but I'm gonna break the net damage, and you could probably work game on that. Or I'm gonna look for something big. If you want to try and overload, so and leading more to nature. This can help set up ice behind it, like give it tags, but again, an especially strong ice and subs is not an especially high number of break it.
Thrantar, you're breaking up a little here.
Before getting to the high.
So I guess, Allison, I'll put the same question to you. Do you think you're mostly going bigger? Do you think you're playing Tsarevna? Do you think you're going smaller when you're looking at NBN ice?
Depends on the deck, I guess, but
Yeah.
I think Serena is probably a good comparison here of like it's like credit cheaper and probably pretty comparable to Starlet Knight when threat is active and the runner has one tag on them. So that's kind of asking that question of which one do you want between these two kind of has such a heavy lean towards Serena of how much has to go right for Starlight Knight to even be on the same level. I guess it does have a hard end the run if the runner is tagged, which is a plus compared to Serena, but just as since that part isn't active for most of the game, I don't like it.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, well, let's not spend too much time bashing on a card then, and we'll bring the show to a close. I guess, Allison, I might ask, what's your favorite card that's been spoiled so far, not just today, but across the whole season?
Well, I think Audrey V2 just as kind of like a whole bunch of cute little references bundled into one has been my favorite card. Like a lot of the cards I've immediately thought, oh, what does this go in? How good is this? But Audrey V2 is the one that I was like, oh, that's very cute. I'm happy that card exists. But for which one I'm most excited to play, probably Hermes, just as a yet another criminal console that feels like it's competing against every other criminal console and being awesome. Like just the value from Penny Shaver, Masterwork synergies, and like I've been running a Swift deck a whole bunch. I'm just an extra click off of everything seems fantastic. But the bounce to hand effect just has a lot of flexibility with both slowing down the corp and potentially getting your own combo turns without needing to put reprise in your deck. Is a nice plus.
Right. And Thrantar, you might be back now, you said?
Yes.
All right, so I'll ask
Looking back.
you the final question then, which is, what are you most excited about for so far? This was spoiled across this whole spoiler season.
So, as a player that Corpside only plays Red Planet Couriers, Big Beal, there's one obvious answer, and it is Treeline. I am ready for advanced ice that I can pitch to advance my ice.
That's a
And then
great
those
a
cards are going to
great
build
buff
later.
for
Don't
that
worry
deck.
about it.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. This has been a ton of fun. This was a fun set of cards. For those of you that are watching along or even guesting on this show, the spoilers that I am actually revealing will go on a video premiere live at 8 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow morning. So only what is that, 12 and a half hours from now. And I hope that y'all will enjoy them. I think there's some other spoilers coming out tomorrow as well that are some of the more rules complex cards, so I'm looking forward to that. I will be doing Daily Cast tomorrow, and then Saturday's Daily Cast is going to look a little bit different because I'll be doing it from an event. For those of you who are on the Eastern Seaboard and thinking about going to East Coast Nationals, do it. I will be there. There'll be a lot of people there. We'll be having a lot of fun. And on Sunday, we'll be doing a spoilers, legal, standard, and startup side event. I think actually 2 separate side events. And you should come out and have a great time and support some great TOs doing a lot of great work. And I hope to see you all then. And with that said, I think that's going to wrap it up for tonight. So thanks once again to all of my guests for coming on. And thanks to everyone in chat for hanging out.
Thanks for having me.